when a new employee starts, reach out and introduce yourself to them and start to, tell them about what you do and ask what they do and make that connection there. So I think there's other ways that even outside of, professional organizations, you can make those connections.
Welcome back to Have a Map, where we talk all things career. I'm your host, Mamadou Njai. Excited to be back on here. As you've seen, we've had some new hosts on here, so we're excited about that. Gives us time back into our day. But before we get started, I want to introduce one of our newer interns, Bryn, and have Bryn introduce herself, talk a little bit about where she is from.
Hello, I am one of the new IO interns here at DIM. I just graduated with my master's in IO psychology, so this internship is an incredibly exciting venture for me. I hope to someday get my PhD in IO psychology because I would like to become a researcher.
Beautiful, beautiful. Bryn always comes with some great energy, so excited for this conversation today.
Because I have no chill.
So let's introduce our guest today, Bre Timko. Bre, you're calling in from St. Louis, is that correct?
I'm in Pittsburgh. I'm a St. Louis native, but I live in Pittsburgh now. Yeah.
Look at that. It's the interview rust that I'm trying to get off. So, Bre, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and the work that you do?
Yeah, definitely. So I am an IO psychologist. That's kind of my primary identity. Education-wise, I completed my PhD in IO psychology back in May 2017. And I also went to law school as well and concentrated in labor and employment law. So I do also have a JD, which I received in 2018. I like to say that I love school. I'm kind of a lifetime student. And in terms of work, I currently work at DDI, which is a leadership consulting firm that's headquartered in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's why I made the move to Pittsburgh a couple years ago when I started full-time at DDI. And at DDI, I'm the team leader of reporting and analytics on a team that's called the Engineering and Reporting Services team. So my team essentially supports all of our enterprise surveys and reporting for the whole organization internally, as well as all of our external clients. So we work with our leadership assessment data to create interactive reports and run analyses. Another big initiative that my team is involved in is our impact evaluation. So we've created the surveys and reports that measure the success of DDI's offerings. To what extent are our assessments and development solutions contributing to more effective leaders on the job? So that's another big project that I'm involved in. But there's so much variety in my work, and between the internal and external projects, I'm always busy.
Very cool. And yeah, I think that's always interesting. We always talk about it on the podcast and just how we always like people to give a explanation of the work that they're doing, because from role to role, everything can be, or from title to title, everything at that specific company can be different. So it helps to give, a good background and foundation of what type of work that you're doing on a day-to-day.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll let Bryn take it from here.
You went over how each day kind of runs. And one thing I've heard from a lot of IO psychologists is that every day is completely different. Could you talk a little bit about how COVID has changed your role? Like you said, you relocated, but most places are working remote now. Could you just talk a little bit how that has changed things for your job?
Yeah, definitely. I do have to say I did relocate before COVID. I actually relocated to Pittsburgh in August 2018. So I'm coming up on 3 years here now. But I am working remotely, have been throughout the pandemic. But I would say that the biggest impact on my job is that, we're a leadership development consulting firm. So we we lead courses and leadership development assessments from the frontline leader level, so first time leaders, all the way up to the C-suite executive level. And a lot of our courses are offered in person. We have in-person facilitators, both from DDI and from our client organizations that have been trained by DDI to facilitate our courses. And unsurprisingly, all of that had to move, into an online virtual format when the pandemic started. Fortunately, we already have a ton of web-based and virtual classroom offerings at DDI. So we were really, really well positioned to make that pivot when COVID started. And we had the infrastructure already set up to be able to move everything into that virtual or web-based format. So our courses moved that direction. And then for me, like I mentioned, one of my biggest projects is this impact evaluation initiative where I've developed the surveys and also the reports that measure the impact of our solutions. And so that's been more important than ever with COVID, because a lot of companies, they were impacted financially with the pandemic, and budgets were cut. They didn't have as much money to spend. And one thing that made it to the chopping block more than ever was leadership development, unfortunately, because it's the time that leadership development's needed, almost more than ever. But it's a way to potentially cut something and save the organization money, at least in the short term. I don't think it does in the long term, but and so the organizations that retained their leadership development programs faced more pressure than ever to provide that data on the ROI. So what value is this really bringing to our organization? And that's the data that me and my team can provide. So like I said, we develop these surveys, we have reports that get at the degree to which leaders are displaying effective leader behaviors on the job post-program, to what extent they're getting support from their managers, to what extent they're improving on core leadership skills. And we're able to provide that data back to our client organizations so that they have some metrics on the return on investment of our programs. So I would say the pressure to provide that data and run those impact studies has been greater than ever. And I'm so happy that we have that offering that we're able to provide to our clients and to give them that data.
I think that's incredibly interesting that you say leadership is one of the first things to be cut, because we all know good companies come from the top. It's the leadership that leads everything. And I agree with you. It's sad that that's kind of the first thing to go. Speaking on the topic of leadership and data collection and all of that, you have a background also in law. So how does that play into what you're doing? Does that help influence your leadership direction? I also just want to throw out there that you had an internship at the zoo, and I do not know anybody else who has ever gotten to say they work at a zoo. So that's really cool.
Yeah, so I can definitely talk about that. I do need to preface this by saying that I went to law school. So let me back up a little bit and provide some background leading up to this. So when I was in my IO program, my research focused on employment discrimination in the selection process. And I specifically focused on physical attractiveness biases. So, do more attractive people have advantages in the recruitment and selection process? Spoiler alert, and not surprisingly, I did find that there are advantages, which is aligned with previous research as well. But my focus on employment discrimination in my IO program is really what inspired me to pursue a law degree. And I did so not necessarily intending to switch careers and go into the practice of law. I was already working in an IO consulting role at the time, at a previous company, and then at DDI, my current company. And I went into it very open. If I got to law school and decided I wanted a career change, then I was open to it. but that wasn't what I was going into it, expecting, and I was pretty much expecting to stay the IO path. So that being said, I haven't practiced law. I am a licensed attorney, but I have not practiced law in my role, and I don't now either. So I bring more of a theoretical law background to my role, and I will say that it definitely helps. But I also need to say that I don't use it every single day in my job. So most of the way that my law background comes up is, we'll get questions from prospective clients on the validity of our leadership assessments, or what accommodations we can offer that are compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act when it comes to our assessment offerings and things like that. So I'll get looped into those questions. I try to stay pretty up to date on legal research. We do have a legal team at my company that also, plays that role, but I try to stay up to date, especially from an IO perspective, so that if there's anything relevant that comes up, any big lawsuits that would have implications for the work that we do in our assessments, I'm able to, offer insights there and communicate that information out to, those who it's relevant for. But day to day, I don't necessarily use my law background, on a day-to-day basis, but it definitely does come up as an advantage a lot of times when we get those questions about validation. How well do our assessments work? How predictive are they? What accommodations can we offer? Things like that.
I find that incredibly fascinating because that's never an aspect of validation and proving that your studies actually work as coming into law. I always thought about it as just statistics, and that's what you rely on. So that's incredibly interesting, and I can see how that would add one more hat to your many roles, which sometimes is good and sometimes is bad. My next question, you are very involved in SIOP and education. How did you become interested in mentoring and education and passing along what you know?
Yeah, I've always just had a natural inclination to want to help other people that are earlier in their career or earlier in their IO journey. So I'm an only child, and so I didn't have older siblings or anybody like that, and IO is not necessarily a super popular field where there's a ton of other people to lean on, at least at the time that I was applying. I think it's gaining in popularity, but this was almost 10 years ago now that I was applying to programs, and so I really didn't know what I was doing, and I had to just figure it all out on my own with the help of Google, thankfully. But I don't want other people to be in that position. I want to be able to help other people. I have gone through this. I have so much that I can provide in terms of advice and direction and connection with other people. It would be a missed opportunity if I didn't. So I've always just had this, I get satisfaction out of mentoring and helping other people. When I was in grad school, I led a research lab that had both undergrad and graduate students. So I got to serve as a mentor in that role. I guess that was in a formal capacity, but I also constantly offered up, my availability to help with conference submissions or, analysis projects that other people were working on, just so that I could help wherever I could. And then I also got into teaching in grad school as well. That was kind of part of my graduate program in the beginning. And then I continued to do it by choice later on. And that was something else I really enjoyed. I love psychology in general, and I originally taught an introduction to psychology class. So getting to kind of go back to, Psych 101 and share that information with these undergraduate students that might have been exposed for the first time in that class to psychology was just really, really fulfilling. And then most recently, I've been teaching an employment law course. I teach that online through the university where I completed my PhD in IO. And that's actually a graduate course. So it's equally as fulfilling though, because it's, and for a lot of people, it's the only law related class that people are taking, because I'm teaching to business students. So getting to share that my knowledge of law with them is also really fulfilling, especially because, like I said, I don't necessarily use law every single day at work. So getting to share that through teaching, I get a lot of enjoyment out of that as well.
That is fantastic that you're teaching Psych 101, because you get to be one of those people who kind of slides IO into it, because we all know barely anybody is interested or not interested, but knows about IO. The other thing, I have a background in teaching. So as an educator and as somebody who is trying to get into the world, I appreciate what you are doing so incredibly much. It's amazing, and thank you for doing that. Along those lines, I actually have two follow-up questions.
Mm-hmm.
One would be, what advice would you give somebody breaking in? And the other would be, did you have a hard time switching from in-person teaching to online teaching? Because those are totally different.
Yeah, so are you looking specifically for advice for somebody wanting to break into teaching specifically?
Ooh, okay. That would be definitely interesting, because I would like to get back to teaching as well.
Okay, yeah. So I would say in terms of, I guess I can talk about just mentoring in general and also teaching. So I would say SIOP, the Society for Industrial and Organizational Psychology, that's a great resource to connect with others. That's, how we connected. So here's an example in and of itself. But there's so many opportunities to connect. They even have mentoring programs at the conference every year. So you can sign up as a mentor, an ambassador, connect with people that way. You can meet people either virtually, like it has been the past couple of years, or in person, which will hopefully resume next year, and kind of, connect with people, take people under your wing if they're earlier in their career and need, some mentorship and advice and guidance. I think that's a great opportunity to get involved that way. And in terms of getting into teaching, I would also say, using your network. That's honestly how I landed the teaching jobs that I've had. I had connections to start teaching intro psych in grad school. I taught both at the university that I was at, but also at a local community college. And the director there had been a student at the university where I was in grad school. So we had that connection. And then most recently, when I've been teaching employment law online, I got that through connection also from the university where I went to grad school. So both of those came from connection. So that just reiterates even more, the value that networking and connecting with others can have. In terms of getting into IO, I don't know if that's another direction
Yes,
you would want me to go. Okay, so I want to make sure I answer all the questions. So in terms of getting into IO, I would say, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but the importance of networking is key. The importance of utilizing the resources of SIOP is key. SIOP has a list of graduate programs on their website, and they have different information and criteria related to each one. They have whether they offer online or in person, master's or PhD, et cetera. So I would say looking at that, I actually, I didn't know that existed when I was applying, and it would have been really helpful. So for me, I was just kind of Googling IO programs, and I probably did a lot more work than I needed to because I didn't know about SIOP and the resources on their website. So I would definitely say using SciOp to research programs and also to find local IO groups. So there's typically a local IO group in every bigger city, and a lot of them are, especially now, offering virtual meetings and opportunities. So even if you don't live, right in the city, then you may be able to join some events virtually. So I would encourage that. And then I would also encourage, even before getting there at the undergrad level, taking business classes, taking IO classes if they're offered. And unfortunately, they weren't offered where I went to undergrad, but I did take a lot of business classes. I actually have a business minor from undergrad, and I think that definitely helped both make sure I was interested in IO, but also make me stand out as an applicant when I was applying to grad school, because I did have that business background. So taking those business classes, using SciOps, SciOps there for a reason, using those resources, finding local IO groups, connecting with people, having these conversations, and trying to do what you can to start getting connected to the field, even before you're officially in a program and in the field, I think is key.
So with mentorship, you said to become a mentor is a lot about networking, or finding a mentor. I'm sorry, finding a mentor is a lot about making connections. Is networking also the way to become a mentor? Is that how you find people who need mentorship?
Yeah, I think it definitely goes both ways, especially in the case of, the annual SciOp conference. I think that's a great opportunity, again, going both ways, for mentors to meet mentees and mentees to meet mentors. I also think just even, at work, when a new employee starts, reach out and introduce yourself to them and start to, tell them about what you do and ask what they do and make that connection there. So I think there's other ways that even outside of, professional organizations, you can make those connections. And then I think those local IO groups are also a great resource, because a lot of those have events all throughout the year, whereas SciOp is kind of, they have the primary conference, and then they have other conference, like smaller conferences throughout the year. But the local IO groups have events all throughout the year. So I would definitely recommend those as a resource as well for making those connections. And I think I still need to answer your second question about the online
Yes.
teaching as well. Yeah, so I did not find the transition that difficult from going from in-person to online teaching. And I think the reason is because when I was a student, especially in undergrad, but also in grad school and law school, I took a combination of in-person and online classes, mostly in person, but I did take several online, especially my last couple months of law school. They began offering online classes, so I took a couple in law school as well. So I had that experience as a student taking, both types of classes. And when I taught intro psych, that was in person. So like that whole experience was in person, but I did teach a summer section that was online of intro psych. So I had a couple weeks of experience teaching online in that capacity. And then this employment law class that I've been teaching, that was actually always scheduled to be online, simply because I'm in Pittsburgh and it's through a university that's in St. Louis. So by design, that was always going to be online. But it actually started in March 2020. So it started right when COVID hit and everything moved online anyway. So it would have gotten moved online, but fortunately it had already been designated as being online. And so I had everything set up online already and didn't have to make the transition to, from in person. But I definitely drew from my experience as a student taking online classes when I was just, because I actually designed that class. I forgot to mention that, but employment law it didn't exist yet at the university. And so I designed everything for it. And as I was designing it, I was putting myself in the mindset of a student. I mean, I wasn't a student, it wasn't that long ago that I was sitting in the student chair, the student seat. And so I definitely kept that mindset and, what would I want? What would be helpful for me? What would be clear for me as a student, if I was taking this course? And I think that definitely helped in terms of the design as well for online learning.
Thank you for sharing that, because I am watching many of my friends struggle because their schools were all in person and they didn't know how to transition. A lot of the teachers are older, they don't want to transition. And the students who would flourish more by in person, they're really getting left behind because A, it's not their learning style in the beginning, and B, the teachers are completely not prepared for that. So I think it's very key. You said that you have experience doing both.
Mm-hmm.
Touching on your business minor, how many subjects have you studied?
Well, so I have a psychology major from undergrad and a business minor and an information technology minor. And I think part of the reason for that is because I always loved psychology, but for a while I was, toying with a business major or an IT major, and I couldn't really make one set decision. So I just decided I would do two minors. So I would get a little bit of both, but psychology would be my primary subject.
I've heard a number of IO people say that business degrees have really, really helped them. Have you found that that has also been a very vital key, and how so? If yes, how so has that played into things for you?
I think so. I mean, I definitely don't think it would hurt, especially even just taking some business classes, even if, a degree isn't the end result, just taking those classes, I think can help. In my IO program, we were actually required to take MBA classes on top of our IO classes.
Oh, wow.
So even if I hadn't taken any in undergrad, I would have gotten that exposure in grad school anyway. I'm not sure how many programs do that, but I definitely think that was helpful in my program. And I think the main way that it was helpful is just it brought me the closest to actual business problems. So a lot of the people in the classes, they were already working. I was not yet working because I was in grad school full time. But a lot of the people in the classes, they worked outside of school, and so they were bringing these, real business problems to the class, and these classes are largely discussion based. So I really got to learn from the other students in the class. They weren't, your traditional lecture based classes where you're learning theory and concepts and fundamentals. They were very, very real and discussion based. And so it gave me that exposure again before I had started my career, because I was a full-time student. It gave me that exposure through my fellow students to these issues that companies are facing, and then we would discuss potential ways to, go about resolving them or investigating them further. And it really just helped me put on that practical business hat instead of just my theoretical student hat.
Which I think that's also a very interesting way to look at education and potentially getting into mentoring, is learning from your fellow students and seeing how much of a different background they have and how they can help you. I would like to see if Mo has anything he would like to add, if he has anything he'd like to say.
I think you've done a great job with these questions. I think this is one of the best interviews we've had. My question is from more of a mental health standpoint. You do a lot, and with that, balance is something we always talk about with our students when going into these careers. So, how do you balance your day-to-day activities and kind of the second question would be like, what does self-care look like for you because of that busy schedule? Because I can relate to, we were just talking about that before the interview about burnout and things of that nature. So what does that balance and self-care look like for you?
Yeah, I love that you're asking this question because I feel like this is becoming more and more of a hot topic, but I still feel like not enough people talk about it or focus on it. So first of all, I appreciate that you're asking about this and we're getting to have this conversation and share this information. And I'll say that, for me, I'm a very disciplined person and I'm a person that's very focused on time management and kind of scheduling my days and my time ahead of time. That was especially important when I was in school. There was a period of time where I was finishing up my dissertation for my PhD. I was taking law school classes in the evening and I was working during the day. So I had these three major buckets of activity that I was juggling. And on top of that, I have family and friends and I have a dog and other obligations that I needed to attend to. And really just kind of partitioning my days. This is the time I'm going to work on my dissertation. This is the time I'm going to work on law school homework. This is when I'm in law school classes. This is when I'm working. That really helped. And then I would give myself, and again, this was a couple of years ago, I would give myself one night a weekend to do something fun. And then the other night was usually devoted to studying. Unfortunately, that's how I had to manage my time at the time to get everything done that I was putting on myself at the time. I will say that was one of the most stressful times of my life, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because it was a lot. But, I really wanted everything I was doing. I was passionate about everything I was doing, and I think that's what drove me, to the finish line there. But nowadays, I'm still juggling a lot. My work is extremely busy. Every day is, just from the time I log on in this virtual world until the time I sign off, everything is just, the emails are flowing, the Teams messages are flowing, and the work is flowing, the meetings are flowing, everything is happening so fast. And I'm, working on updating my house. My husband and I bought a house a couple of years ago. So there's personal things that I'm, have going on too. And I think it's still trying to have boundaries. This is my work time, especially in this virtual world, because it's so easy to, you're not leaving the office every day. Maybe you're leaving the room you work in, but you're not physically leaving the office building. And so really establishing those boundaries that, I'm going to work from 8 to 4, or 8 to 5, or 8 to noon, and then I'm going to take a break, and then I'm going to work again until 5. Having those boundaries and sticking to them, I think, is really helpful. Designating time, to spend with friends and family, I think, is also necessary, to make sure that you're fulfilling those personal needs in addition to your professional needs. That's something that we talk about a lot at my company, is people have personal needs too. So, focusing on both sides of the coin. And then I also think self-care is extremely important. About a year ago, I started doing meditations every day. I use an app called Insight Timer on my phone. It's free. It has thousands and thousands of meditations. And this is something that's really easy to do, especially when working from home, but it would still be easy to do even working in an office. I put my AirPods in, they cancel out all the other noise, and I can just listen to my meditation. There's ones as short as, 2 or 3 minutes if, you don't have 5 or 10 or 30 minutes to do a meditation. There's shorter ones, there's breathing exercises, different things like that kind of help take a step back, reset. And for me, they're just really calming. It's almost like I'm getting kind of a nap, even if it's just a 5-minute meditation. I come out of it feeling refreshed and just so much better than before I did the meditation. So that's something that I've found super helpful. I'm also a very active person. I do yoga, I do Pilates, I walk. I have 2 dogs now, so I walk my dogs every day. I think that helps as well. Getting those endorphins flowing, the blood flowing, super, super helpful in terms of self-care. Again, especially if you have a desk job and you're kind of sitting all day, I think it's important to be getting up and moving around. And then just setting aside some time for pure relaxation, which I'm really bad about, because I always say I don't even really like relaxing. I don't find relaxing. I like to be doing things, but in the end, everyone needs some time. And so setting is whatever that means for you. If it means doing a face mask, painting your nails, watching your favorite TV show, whatever that relaxation looks like for you, sitting there doing nothing could work for people too. I think is also important to have that designated time. Everyone needs a different amount of that time. I happen to not need a whole lot, but everyone's different. So, setting aside the time you need, and when you feel like you're getting overwhelmed, take a step back, go on a walk downstairs and fill up your water bottle, whatever you need to do to, keep that energy going and avoid getting to that point of complete burnout.
Yeah. I really like a few things. Oh, I like a lot of the things that you had said, but one of the things that really stuck out to me, and the one thing I was going to ask when you literally came into my head and you started talking about it, was the boundaries, because I think that's the toughest thing, especially for newer employees and newer people in the workforce, where I feel like they need to be available for everything, and that leads to quicker burnout, rather than setting up boundaries for yourself and then being able to have those boundaries, and then you can still be available for things here and there, but you don't have to um, overextend yourself, because that's when that's when people think you can do all of these things, and then they're
Mm-hmm.
gonna expect you to do that consistently. And that's one of the things you always talk about, because that consistency is so key within the working space of making sure you're being able to produce at a high level on a day-to-day basis. But you have to be okay with saying no and setting boundaries within that space. So happy you talked about that.
Yep, exactly. And I think even if it's not saying no, even if it's saying not right now,
Yeah.
but in 2 weeks, I think that's something else I've also learned, especially during COVID, that has helped me, kind of maintain that balance in my work as well.
Yeah, because saying not right now or no can be very intimidating
Yeah.
if you're not at like a higher level, quote unquote, depending on what type of company you're working. So,
Yeah. But everyone has 24 hours in the day. So, people that are higher up don't unfortunately have any more time than anyone else. So it's still important I definitely acknowledge it can be intimidating, but you have to advocate for yourself and what you need. And it's going to be worse to let yourself get to that burnout point than to just vocalize your needs. Again, both personal and professional needs are
yeah,
important.
definitely. And as we come to a closeout, I wanted to ask one of our famous questions, the questions that we always ask is, if you had to describe the last few days that you've been going through based on a song, artist, or album, which one would it be and why? And since you are the guest, you don't have to go first. You can pick who you would like to go first. I like to give people options here, because that's a great working environment, giving people options. So, uh, Bree, what do you want to go first, or do you want to, pass it off to Bryn? That's another space you could go to as well.
I guess I'm gonna pass it off to Bryn. I really want to hear what you have to say before I share.
I actually have a pet bunny, and bunnies are complete divas. We just put in a portable AC, which means it sits on the ground, and she has decided that that is her favorite thing. She cuddles up to the AC. She does her little diva thing. And so I've actually had Save Britannia stuck in my head watching my bunny. Save Britannia is kind of the song that everybody thinks of when they think of like the royalty and anything that cuts to a British scene. It's just very majestic, very royal. And so watching my bunny be the complete diva that she is, that's what I've had in my head lately.
That's a great explanation. I love that.
Mine, I think, is inspired by the fact that I recently took a CPR class, and one of the songs that they say you can do the chest compressions to is Staying Alive, because it puts you at the right rhythm when doing these chest compressions for CPR. So that's where my head is going right now, is to Staying Alive. And I don't mean that in a scary way. I like being busy. If you haven't gathered that so far from this conversation and from my background, I like being busy, but I do feel like I said, every day is just goes by so quickly. There's so much going on, and then I'm doing things outside of work, like my involvement with the PSYOP organization. And so staying alive is what's going through my head. But again, I don't mean that in a in a bad way at all. I just mean that things are going so fast, and you really gotta keep the pace up, and keep the momentum going to keep the energy throughout the day, going into work and other things that I have going on.
When you said that, I literally saw that part where it's like, and I saw it down on the chest. I saw it. I literally visualized the whole thing. I get it. So now, maybe you just taught me about, saving someone's life. That's great.
There you go.
Learn. Um, I'm gonna pick one of my favorite rappers. He just put out an album. His name is J. Cole. But he was talking about, it related to me in these last few days of like mastering your craft. He's a rapper who's kind of like at the top of his career, and he's gotten so comfortable within his like lifestyle where he just set up his own schedule, and he wanted to go back to those days of like trying to get on into the music industry, which is a very tough industry to get into. So putting himself through these drills and like really trying to get the best out of himself that he could. And I relate to that because that's where I feel like, we've made it through COVID as an entrepreneur in the event business. Making it through COVID is a huge thing. And now we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. So as we prepare for the opening up of the world, it's just staying focused and staying doing these little drills to keep yourself energized and trying to consistently find the betterment within yourself, and then within those around you. So yeah, that's the one. That's the artist I'm gonna pick. I don't think I've actually picked the artist before, but I'll pick the artist. So beautiful. Well, it's been so great to chat with you today, Bre. One thing we like to do here is we like to give people a round of applause as we close out, because it is an honor to always have career professionals like yourself who have done so much in your industry to come on and chat with our interns and chat with our team and chat with our community of people at the Have a Map. So thank you so much for that. And we really enjoyed having a great conversation with you and answering all those questions, and inspiring us to look at. And I think that's the one thing that really stood out to me, is like looking at your career in a different lens, like getting a law degree, adding these different things to your arsenal to set yourself apart and do something a lot different. And I think that's very inspirational, because that's why this platform exists, where people can hear that. And what you talked about, I relate, like being an only child, not knowing what direction to go into because you don't have anyone to help you within that. So I relate to that, and I'm very thankful for you coming on today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I love having these conversations. I love making these connections, and it's been so fun to get to share my experience with everyone today.
Bryn, any last words before you close out?
I, again, want to say thank you. I have learned so much. I definitely have to think about what classes I want to take to add to, as Mo said, to my arsenal. This has been fascinating, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. And to our listeners, thank you. Whether this is you listen to this during your mornings, afternoons, or evenings, We appreciate you tuning in. Skirt, skirt. We are out.